Okay, I'm going to teach you how to draw this, break it down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go at creating this and amaze yourself. Okay, so as I explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn about the painting process and techniques, but also about the app that I'm using, PROCREATE. But that isn't to say you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. But within PROCREATE, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And also, by default, in their color profile, I'm using their sRGB code, the one that ends in 2.1. It's here on the list. Then within PROCREATE, I'm going to use the brushes that come free with the app. We'll keep it fairly simple for this tutorial. We'll use within airbrushing the soft brush, maybe the medium brush and the medium hard brush. Within charcoals, the burnt tree brush. I've already pre-selected a color palette here. Within PROCREATE, if you go to the value section, each of the colors you tap on it. In here, in the hexadecimal code area in this box, is a code for each color. Now, each of these codes I've put down in the video description, so you just need to copy and paste them into this box one at a time. Press enter, the color will appear up here, and then you can tap it into your created color palette one at a time. Or to save you some time, there is a link in the video description next to the codes that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel and help make future content possible, but it's also the place that you can gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of many of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon currently and also in the past. It really has and continues to make a huge difference, so thank you so much. With all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So the first thing we're going to do with our canvas is rotate it to the portrait orientation. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the first color. And I'm going to drag from the color circle at the top right into the canvas, and it flood fills the whole canvas. And I'll create another layer, layer 2. I prefer to keep things on different layers just in case something goes a little bit wrong, or we want to make some finer adjustments later on. To have them on separate layers is more useful. Also, please be aware that the camera that I use tends to shift and change the colors a little bit. But don't worry, if you have downloaded the colors, your colors will be accurate even though it might look different on this video. So I'm going to go on this layer to the airbrushing soft brush, and I'm going to go to the second color on the top row, maybe 10% size, 30% strength, and it's going to start pretty subtle. We'll just zoom in a little bit. We're just going to create some blobs, subtle textures for the background initially, tapping it in a few times. You just want to get rid of that flatness. Want to suggest in the background that perhaps there's leaves and other things on the ground that would be obviously relevant and appropriate to autumn or Halloween this time of year. Obviously, I say autumn, I'm from the UK. I dare say that lots of people watching this would use the term fall for this time of year, which definitely makes sense when you think about all the leaves that do fall. And obviously in this image are going to be sort of collected on the ground, for example. I'll stay on this same layer, but I'll go to the third color, and I'm just going to start circling in this sort of bluey tone. And if I just show you the color that we're working with, it is very much in this vivid blue, but it's obviously darkened out in this area. But we just want to sort of circle this in now. Same settings as before, so it's still 10% size, still 30% strength. But we're just going to circle it in, bring in just a bit more luminance into that background. It's very dark. We don't want it to be too dark. Now, we're not going to bring it much further than about 2/3 of the way down. I don't want to get rid of all of that black. We're just gently circling that in some places a bit more than others. Probably nearer the top, we need a little bit more. Imagine sort of like the daylight, if you like, or the moonlight perhaps might be a better way to think about it. But the subject matter is sort of pulling in from the top there a little bit, even though the light source is off canvas, off camera, if you like, if you imagined it like a photograph. We'll just get this sense in there initially. We're just creating texture really for the background. Don't need to overly worry about the accuracy of this. Yours is going to be different naturally because I'm just really scribbling this in, and that's absolutely fine. Perhaps I'll create a new layer just in case. Go to our colors. We'll go to the fourth color, which is going to be significantly lighter. And we're just going to start bringing this in from the top initially, just tapping it in. I'm going to do it from this corner. Make sure you get it right at the very corner. Maybe this corner too. just lightly scribbling in. Not something that is difficult at all. It's just about judging what looks acceptable. And, you know, all sorts of variations on this will look fine too. Doesn't need to be really something you agonize over. That's a word I like to use because it's what I really don't want you to do. These tutorials are meant to be fun. Takes a lot of the pressure out of art. It's just something that gets you being creative, hopefully. Gets you to create an image without all of the pain and anguish and agony that sometimes can go along with being creative. Hopefully this just makes it a bit more fun, a bit more therapeutic than that. And by the end of this process, we'll end up with something that looks pretty cool. So that's the beginning of our background. Again, I'll create a new layer, go to our colors, and perhaps we'll use some lighter colors. We'll go for maybe skip a blue. We might come back and use that blue, but we'll go to the 6th color, which is a real strong, let's have a look. It's more of an orangey red, which is quite nice. Turn it back down again. Maybe 5% this time, size. 30% strength is fine. In fact, no, that's a little bit strong actually. Let's put that down a bit more, 20%. And we will just start to bring in subtle suggestions, and I'm only pressing lightly. I'll zoom in. The brush is quite pressure sensitive, so it can be really quite dramatic like that, or if I press lightly, you'll hardly even see it and I can build it in. Now, please assume that for the most of what I'm doing, I'm pressing relatively lightly. If you're a bit heavy-handed and you struggle to work lightly, then my percentage of 20% for you might be better at 10. But I'm telling you that I'm putting mine at 20%. And then I'm pressing lightly, letting the pencil sort of graze across the surface, not putting much pressure on at all. Prefer subtlety. Build things up gradually. These first couple of minutes, you're not going to see an image appear just yet. It's just about setting the stage. Go to the next color, the 7th color. It's all part of the process. Got to allow the different stages to build up, have their own time. Now we're starting to add some perhaps leaves on the ground that are just becoming a little bit more noticeable. They're very much out of focus. If this were a photograph, we have a depth of field. We have the foreground element that we're going to add. Our little Halloween candle that's going to be in focus. And then this is all just going to be pushed into the background. Just a mass of colours, autumnal, fall colours. The background look should look really nice. And then we have maybe the 8th colour. Maybe something down here is just catching the light a little bit more. Again, still out of focus. Okay, I think that's probably enough a suggestion of a background initially, and we can always go back and refine that further. But for now, we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer, layer 5. And on this layer, I'm going to go in with the first color on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the medium brush, then airbrushing, maybe the top end of 2% size and 100% opacity now. And then relatively high up, we'll set the top edge of our ellipse here to about there. And you can just join them up with a really bad ellipse, but it doesn't matter because we can move it. If it's gone a bit wonky, you can always go on the transform and rotate it till it's more horizontal if that's what you want. I'll just zoom in. And then, well, I don't really feel like the candle needs to be straight lined at all. There are times for perfect shapes in certain situations, certain images, but this isn't really one of them. So I'm okay for it maybe to even sort of spread out near the base. Maybe it emerges from the ground almost like it's grown out from it. And then I'm just going to put the size up 6% and I'm just going to color this in. It's a very bright orange. This is not the color that's going to be sort of remaining for very much of this tutorial. We're going to soften this. But once we've got that general shape, we needed that ellipse at the top. That was the most important part. Now we'll go to our layers, create a new layer, layer 6, and we'll tap on it and we'll put on the clipping mask. Now it creates a little arrow. It links it to the layer underneath. So if you were to go in with a completely different color, go over the top, you can see it is contained within the confines of the layer underneath. But it is importantly on a separate layer, so you can remove it and it's really useful. I'll just tap and clear that because that's not really what I wanted to do. And then what I'd like to do with this ellipse is just create a line that just comes across from there to there. And you see it almost creates like a sharper corner. So less of an ellipse, more like a sharp corner. Doesn't need to completely connect. And then just another line that comes underneath there a little bit. It can kind of almost join up to it in the middle. Gets thinner, but they get a little bit thicker at the outer edges. And it just creates a section, an area, where you've got it kind of more solid still at the edges, but then in the center, Let's just do another line back here as well. So in that center area is going to be more liquid. And once I've done that, I might actually create a new layer. Again, tap on it, put on the clipping mask, same thing. I'm just going to have a go at doing the face. So roughly from the center, maybe a little bit off to the right, we're going to come down and we're going to do a nose. So just a basic, just like you would carve into a pumpkin, we're going to have the same really traditional, simple style, creepy little face. I wouldn't really spend too long on this. In some ways, part of the charm of these kind of carved faces that you get in pumpkins, usually, part of the charm is that they're a little bit rough and they're not overly perfected. But I'm just going to generally just sketch it in. I don't feel like I need to teach anyone how to do this. I think this is pretty straightforward. But I'm just going to do a couple of teeth there in the center, little sharp, almost vampire ones, and then a couple at the outer edge. Yours does not have to be the same as this. You can create your own little character. This is not an essential blueprint, but I'm just going for the super kind of traditional look for it. And if you're not happy with it, you can go to the transform, freeform, and you can always just stretch it, enlarge it, reposition it, find the right balance for yours. I'm just going to put mine about there. I think I'm happy enough with that. Perhaps I'm just going to go over the nose. I can have some light glowing from the center of it, but perhaps just initially I can have a note darker in the center. I think less so from the mouth, but let's just go over some of these shapes. Maybe the teeth can appear almost like a silhouette compared to the light. I'll just go over them a little bit more, firm them up so they're not too lost, like that. And on the same layer, now we've got the basic outline, we can go to some more vibrant colors. So I'm going to go for the 8th color on the middle row. Soft brush with an airbrushing, 3% size, 30% strength. In fact, let's go down a bit further. Let's go down to the 2% size. And then within the eye, we can start to add a bit of a glow coming through. Now, it doesn't have to be equal in all areas. Perhaps in the nose, it can be largely darkened out. In the eye over here, a little bit less than the other one. But definitely in this mouth, I want it to be really vibrant, really sinister and standing out. Let's really color in this gap in the mouth, just so it starts to look separate. We can already see a glow coming through, which will be nice. And maybe we go to the 9th color on the middle row, turn it down into the 1%. Maybe we can just divide this up, have a little sliver of a yellow light coming through in places. And then we can build this down here as well. Treat it a little unevenly. The yellow light doesn't have to be consistent. Whenever you carve a pumpkin, there's going to be a change of different lights. Some bits where you've carved it a bit thinner than others, and other times where it's a complete gap through and you can see candle lights going from the internal bits, whatever. We'll work on that a little bit later as well, but that gets us started. Perhaps we'll go back to the 3rd color, and I'm just going to, by contrast, go around some of the edges perhaps. Again, don't just do one big bold black line. Keep it kind of a little bit patchier than that. It looks a bit more natural. Still in the 1%, even lower perhaps. Now sometimes when you create an edge and you're looking at it slightly differently, you might see less of the dark tone on one side than others. So I'm going to concentrate, because we're looking at it slightly from the side. So this is an edge where you don't see the darkness as much. You do see it in these two lines here. Maybe shut down some of that light even more actually. So it gives a bit more of a 3D effect to see those two edges dark, but then you don't see it there. Likewise, when you come over here, perhaps you're going to see more darkness on this edge. Because remember, on a pumpkin, it would have real thickness. So almost like the wall of the pumpkin there, you can see, though it's a candle. And on the side too, you can see that gives it a little bit of 3D depth. And then in terms of the mouth, well, again, just go around some of these edges, darken up some of the teeth. By contrast, I don't feel like I need to do a firm black line necessarily. Not consistently and all over anyway. Maybe more in some areas. That will do. And already it's starting to look a bit better. But we're going to have a light source in our scene. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to tap on a little N, scroll down to add. We'll change the blend mode now to the add blend mode. So we're going to go with the soft brush with an airbrushing, and we're going to go to the 3rd color on the bottom row. 2% size, 30% strength will do. And we're just going to create our flame. Now, it doesn't need to be completely vertical. It could be just catching the wind a little bit and just leaning it off. Gives a slightly more natural look. Let's create that traditional kind of flame shape though. Not going to come to an absolute point. I think that's a little bit too much. So slightly rounded at the top, round it off. When it comes to the bottom edges, actually you have more of like a shape like this at the bottom. So you almost leave gaps when you get down to this section. It has a little section here, a little section, and then you've just, with another color, you'll do the wick through the center of that gap. So at a certain point, we don't need to close that loop at the bottom, something like this. And then we can go to the adjustments, the bloom. We're just going to scroll that up, and you can see it's a really efficient, easy way of getting that glow. Just do it to 100, deselect. But that's not us finished. We'll go to the first color on the bottom row, 2% size. Let's put it down actually, 20% strength. And we're just going to enhance that glow perhaps. Just go to these edges, bring out some of the warmth a little bit more. But let's turn that percentage down even more, 10%. Turn it up, 3% size. Push that outwards a little bit at those edges. It's still very yellow, so I want to actually increase the warmth. I might go for the orange, the 8th color on the middle row. I might just put it up even more, maybe 5% size, and just extend that warmth outwards a little bit. And again, I'm just grazing the surface. I don't want it to be too potent when I'm adding these other colors, the warm colors. Don't want them to be standing out like that, for example. Really have just gently added them in there. Maybe back 9th color on the middle row. Down again, maybe 2% size. Just using a range of colors. There you go. That's starting to soften in better. I'm happier with that look. Just at the outer edges, soften them together, extending a nice warm effect outwards a little bit. I think that's working more nicely. Just a little bit more at the top, a little bit in the center. And well, we could introduce the blue light actually. Let's go for this really vivid, strong blue, the 5th color on the bottom row. Low on the 2% size, still 10% strength. And we're just going to introduce this near the bottom. It's an easy omission, but the blue element of a candle light is a really important element, I think. Easy to forget about it, or just to not notice it. Let's zoom in. Let's try that again. Let's just build it on that edge a bit more subtly, just at the bottom mainly. We'll creep it in. So almost the blue light is what kind of closes that loop near the bottom, like so. It's subtle, but it's there. And again, if we want to go to the transform, let's just zoom out, and you wanted to lean it, you can lean it, reposition it if you want. I'm quite happy with that. Perhaps for just this center area, it's a little bit fierce, a little bit strong. Let's go in with the eraser. Set the eraser to the soft brush, put it pretty low, 1% size, 20% strength or so, and just slightly just circle in. In fact, that's a bit too potent. Let's turn the percentage down so it's really gradual, 10%. Just circle in, only a hint of removing. You don't want it to become really noticeable, just subtly removing it, like so. We're going to create a new layer, but we're going to drag it underneath layer 8. Whoops, a bit difficult to do. Let's see. There we go. And on this layer, I'm going to go in with the soft brush. I'm going to go in with the first color on the bottom row. And I'm going to start adding a yellow glow to this general area. I'm going to put it to maybe 2% size, maybe 15% strength. And just typically, and just in this area, we'll just add a bit of a yellow glow. Maybe I'll put it up a little bit, 3% size. Bring in that nice yellow flood in this area here. Again, we're just incrementally building in the glow effect. We'll change the color. Perhaps we'll go to the middle row. We'll go for the 5th color, 2% size, still only 15% strength. And then just maybe along this area, we're going to have sections where the candle light really reflects off of the wax, but in a different way, and it gives it a real kind of cool reflected light. And that change of color can be really effective. I mean, we've still got on the clipping mask, so it's impossible to add it outside of the shape. But we've got the ambient light of perhaps the moon reflecting on bits of the candle. We've also got the kind of white light from the flame impacting on things as well. We've also got a section here. Perhaps we could just have the ambient light from above, just reflecting on this. Maybe the top edge of that line, bring it around. And then just a bit more over here. We can get thickening up. Don't have to be particularly neat for this. I'm okay for it to be relatively scribbled in at this stage. Just a bit more over here. And whilst we're on this cool colour, in fact, I'll go backwards a colour. I'll go to the fourth colour. Go in with the soft brush still. Put it to maybe 3% size, still at the 15% strength. And we're just going to, maybe from the edge, start to build in, just circling it in, the impact of some of this colour at this edge. We're going to have a sense that the light's coming slightly more from this side. It's going to be more dark on that edge. Just bring a bit more of it in over here. Not too much. I think the upper area is probably going to be more significantly impacted. So let's turn it down even further. Let's get some sharp details, 1%. And then maybe we'll just get a little bit of sharp highlight impacting. So in contrast to that dark colour, we've got some really whiter, cooler light, just adding textures there perhaps, just in some places around the edge. Again, doesn't need to be consistent, just some texture, bringing it to life a little bit. Just a hint of it here, but not as much because we're going round on the cylindrical shape. The light's going to impact more on this edge. Maybe just the teeth places, catch the light. But we want perhaps to have a little bit of a texture in here, almost like its skin or the texture of the pumpkin or the candle. It's a weird mixture, I think. So we're just bringing in a sense of a little bit of a texture in there as well. Just turn that up a little bit, 2%. Go over this a little bit in places. Maybe here, brighten it up. Quite like that. This outer edge, brighten it up. And you can start to see it's giving it a little bit more of a 3D effect. Okay, I'm going to change colour. I'm perhaps going to have a yellow impact. Maybe we'll go for the 7th colour on the middle row. Still with a soft brush, still on the same layer. 4% size, 15% strength, and we'll just have perhaps a bit of the candle that's a bit thinner. Light is just pooling through. Whenever you get different thicknesses on the candle, light is going to just impact through it a little bit differently. And perhaps you notice the glow coming through in the shadow areas of the candle a little bit more as well. When the light is impacting on the surface, you're going to notice less of the glow from the inside of the candle. We're just building it up in increments. One thing I might do actually, just to blend the bottom part of this candle in, is go back to layer 5, go in with the eraser, set it to the soft brush, 5% size. In fact, no, let's go bigger. Let's go 10% size. Whoops. And 40% strength. And I'm just going to start softening the bottom edge. I want it to kind of blend in a little bit. That bottom area just feels a little bit too clunky at the bottom edge. And that's enough just to get us started. I mean, already that seriously impacts, and it's transformed the whole thing already to look way more realistic. I'm going to go perhaps to layer 5 and create a new layer above that. Again, we've got clipping mask, so it's linked to layer 5. And we're going to go in with the 3rd colour on the middle row with the soft brush, with an airbrushing 5% size and 20% strength. And I'm just going to start shutting down some of the light on this edge. So it's not got much reflected light. It's not got light bouncing off of it. We're in the shadow part. Again, we're just about extending this sense that it's more 3D, and even the immediate impact of that is quite noticeable. Start with a darker colour. We can go in over it with warmer colours. Have a start with a darker colour just to shut some of it down. And I can't get rid of the light of the mouth now because that's on a layer that's above, which is perfect. I'm just going to creep this dark colour around onto this side a little bit. Just add it more and more. Perhaps I'll change to the 2nd colour on the middle row. Like I was saying, a warmer colour. It's going to be really appropriate for much of this. It's just going to soften it in a little bit. I do like Halloween pumpkins' faces. I think they're quite cute in their own way. Although they're supposed to be sinister, they're never really that sinister, are they? They always have a cute element to them, which I like. Let's look at our colours. While we're using that, we can go for an even more red. So the 10th colour on the middle row. Perhaps it'll be important just to show that as a transition between the really cooler colours, or the darker colours rather, and the really vibrant colours, I should say. Okay, I think that's starting to gel together quite nicely, but we've not finished, definitely not. Again, I'm going to go in with the dark colour, third colour, and again, I'm just going to continue to push some of the dark. Again, I don't want to shut down every bit, so maybe there's one or two patches that just the glow is still managing to pull through. It's easy to add light colours over the top anyway, so I'm not overly worried about going too far with the dark. It then will be good fun to go back over it with the light colours, so that's not an issue. I'm actually going to create a new layer, layer 11. We're going to maybe put it at the very top this time, just so we're less confused. We'll not have the clipping mask on this time. And on this layer, I'm going to go initially in with the airbrushing soft brush with the 6th colour on the bottom row. Put it quite low, 2% size, 20% strength. And well, we're going to start introducing the idea. In fact, let's put it down even further. Let's put it down to the 1% and a little bit higher, maybe 30% strength. And we've got the idea of this kind of webbing that's creeping around, wrapping around bits of our candle. So it is like the kind of fake spider's web, which is actually more like fabric, cotton, threads and things like that. It's very kind of a little cheesy, a little naff really, the kind of kitsch Halloween type fake effects. But that's kind of what I want for this aesthetic. I think that actually is part of the look of it, isn't it? That's what we're going for. So we can just build up these in sections. Perhaps we then can have breakaway little bits that just almost like little vines creep around, and other bits that grow off from it like tendrils, little bits that sort of sweep it around and across. I think at the edges we'll probably use the Gaussian blur and just soften them in. We just want this center area to be a little bit more in focus. Move a section over here. I'm not doing it as one movement. I'm allowing it to be quite broken, but it's generally just creeping in and around a candle. A little Halloween pumpkin face. Calling it a pumpkin face because it is in essence exactly that, although it's on a candle rather than a pumpkin. It's still basically a pumpkin face, isn't it? Get creeping across. Again, there's no right and wrong with this. You decide where to thicken it up, where to have it more condensed, or the bits where it's just sections that are really wispy. You get little tendrils, little threads that don't go anywhere, other times where it just all clumps together. Perhaps we can go to the 2nd colour on the middle row. It's just not quite as black, and perhaps actually some of these threads just need to have a hint more warmth to them. They appear a bit more subtle that way. We can go over them with the black if need be. Thicken them up. Really let them just sort of play in and around the face, the candle. There's no set path for these, just let them explore in and around threads that double up. Zoom out, check how it's looking, and I really like the way they're like little tendrils that just creep around the scene. I think it's quite effective. Just move down, and this is a lighter color, so when we get into the darker areas, actually we probably do need to use we'll go for this color, the 7th color, the 6th color rather. We'll build this up. So in the darker areas we need to use that darker color, and perhaps on these edges we can just have the odd rogue thread that's just sticking out on its own. Sweep these around. Again, no right and wrong. You wouldn't be able to copy exactly what I'm doing anyway. It's just there's too much, so you can make up your own version. Perhaps I'll just put it up a little bit more, 2%. Get some thicker areas where it's really clumped together a bit more. Get those big shapes in, and then we can always go in with a finer brush to add kind of the sense of finer threads to our fake cobweb kind of look, if you can even call it that. I mean, it's gone beyond cobwebs really, hasn't it? I would show you very specific forms and shapes for this if it were possible, but it's kind of more of a chaotic element. It's supposed to be a little bit more random looking. So if I was to show you exactly where to place everything, it just wouldn't have the same life to it, the same quality. So it's very deliberately random looking. Swirls and clumps that collect, cross over each other, sweep through perhaps in some places. We're generally getting the idea that it's just wrapping around. If you're not quite getting that sense, then just add a few really prominent shapes that just sweep. Add a bigger block, clumps together, and just, again, just sweeps around perhaps. Clumps together perhaps on this edge. Although we're going to have to add some highlights, but we can start with the dark colour. That's not a problem. Like this. Starting to work, I think. So always start with the dark colour and these kind of things. Let's get rid of that glow in that area. We will add more highlight, but if we get rid of the glow to begin with, I might just put that up to 4%. Again, just shut down some of that light. You can always go back in and re-exaggerate some of the glow if need be anyway. But just shut down the light to begin with. And that's starting to blend in quite nicely. In with the 7th colour, turn it down to 1% size, and we're going to have to turn it down here as well, so maybe 15% strength. Now from this edge, the thread is going to be catching the light. It's more prominent on this side of the candle, but also from above, but definitely from this side. So we're going to highlight some of these threads with the lighter colour now. Now they definitely need to follow the general trend of the darker areas, but they don't need to be completely on top of any individual dark line. Almost better if they're not. So they're just going to randomly keep adding these. Again, just random loose threads. And I think with the lighter colour now, it's going to take on the more of the effect of that kind of fake cobweb look. It'll be more recognisable as that now. So go carefully with this. You don't need to add as much of the highlight. I want it to be a bit more subtle. And I'm still pressing quite lightly. I want this to look really fibrous. Have sections that just cut through. Almost like wiggly lines in some areas, and that's kind of a nice look. Looking pretty cool, I think. But some areas, perhaps it just amasses more, and you just need to go over it a few times. Bring in these highlights. Especially on this edge, it's going to be more out of focus anyway, so I don't mind if you just scribble over it and generally blot it in. And you can see the impact of bringing light in from that edge quite nicely. Just zoom out this area and just look at some of the sweeps and the shapes that you have put with the black colour. And you can't just ignore them. You need to use them as the guide for now some of these lighter sweeping colours. That's what's going to gel the different areas together. If they seem like too random and not connected, then it won't work. The effect, the illusion is going to be the dark from this side then sweeps this way and then becomes the lighter thread as it comes around. It's that interaction between the light and the dark shapes. So a shape here, it comes over to this side, swoops in, becomes a lighter thread. We don't want the light creeping around into this side too much, but you definitely need to have the two connected, otherwise it won't work. So a line here, sweep it in here, and then it becomes part of a lighter thread that really looks pretty good. We can perhaps change the brush, go to the, where were we? Charcoal rather, burnt tree, put it way down, 1%, 50% strength, and then this can be a texture that just builds in a little bit more noise, so it doesn't look too blurred. Brings in a scratchier element, which is quite nice to that texture. More broken texture that I think in combination looks pretty good. Again, you don't need to do a mass of this, but follow some of the lines you've already created. It just adds a little bit more noise in a way that's quite effective. Perhaps 50% strength is a little bit strong, maybe 20 will work. You can build it up more in increments then. Go over it a few times, it builds in, but that's not strong enough, is it? Let's go for something like 30 perhaps. I think that's the sweet spot. And then in the real dark areas, well, we still want some of that, so we'll perhaps use this brush. It's slightly scratchier, more difficult to make out, but again, we definitely want some of those little fibers, little webbing bits to be in the mix. So we can use this brush to build in the subtler suggestions of that perhaps. You can see how it's just disappearing off into this area. We can always go over it with the airbrush if we need to, just to strengthen it up in areas, but quite like the impact that that has. And it doesn't all need to be sweeping lines, it could just be sort of tangled bits of thread too. So really scribble it in one or two areas perhaps. Doesn't all have to be neat. It could just be slightly messy down near the bottom perhaps. But with some areas where you get an obvious sense of direction as well. Nice mixture. Perhaps you could trace along some of these lines and just add scribbled elements to it. So you're getting a real untidy look in conjunction with some of these lines. I think the combination of that is really working. So just get a few threads of this. So perhaps I'll turn it up to 40%. So it's more noticeable. Just really get in some thread elements. That in conjunction, in combination with the soft brush, I think really works. So I've just one or two of those threads just sticking out on the edge, just scribble in, get a messier look to it, which I think is beneficial. Back in with the 6 color. Let's see if we can add some more threads in here. So I'm going to put the opacity up to 100. Let's just go in there and work in with some of these black areas too. Just a slightly scribbled element. Perhaps 100 is a little bit too much to dial it back, maybe 70. So it's not too much. I quite liked the randomness of this brush. It's a good counterpart. It's a good way of offsetting the absolute kind of softness and flatness of the airbrushing, perhaps. Okay, so let's go to that entire layer and we will go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and just zoom in for this so you can really see its impact. Just soften it in slightly, not too much. I think 2% is enough, and it just will gel it all together a little bit better. Now looking at my image, I feel like I need to go back to the flame, layer 8. It's all in one layer, so transform, just moves the flame lower down so it looks like it's more coming from the center of that candle, works better. Go back up to layer 11, back in with the 6 color, soft brush will do, 1% size, maybe 90% strength, and we just need a little candle wick in here. Obviously needs to exist. Still with the black color and the soft brush, 1% size, maybe 40% strength. Maybe I just want to build some of this over the top lip a little bit more. And then maybe with the 7th color, perhaps we just need to add some of that highlight up here as well. It's a bit that's just creeping above, so therefore it should be more impacted by the ambient, maybe moonlight, just like it is over at this side. It doesn't make much sense unless it is just on the top. I think on that whole layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the selection, freehand, and I'm just going to grab a section around that edge here, for example. Go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and we zoom in. Don't want to do it too much, but I'm just going to blur that in a bit more, maybe 3%. Deselect, and you can see it's softened it on the edge, and it really gives the effect of it kind of going round. Do the same over here. So we'll just grab that outer edge, close the loop, adjustments, Gaussian blur, zoom in so you can see the impact, zoom it in to 3% again. And again, it just softens the look, gives it a roundness with that sharp focus in the middle. I'm going to go back to layer 9. I'm going to go in with the soft brush still, and maybe the 5th color on the middle row, 1% size, 40% strength. I'm just going to build in along this lip, stronger highlight. In fact, we probably need a stronger highlight from the candle itself, so maybe the 3rd color on the bottom row. And I guess we need to show the impact of the candle on that, just the top lip, even on the thread there a little bit. That definitely works. But then we'll go back to the 5th color on the middle row, and then perhaps the moonlight, the ambient light, takes over that job in other areas. So let's put that up maybe now to 2% and just tap in some textures. Maybe there's almost like a little bit of an edge here, catches the light. That looks chunkier, I like that. Bring that effect across here, and then just have this sense of it kind of, sometimes when wax melts, it creates sort of interesting textures, little blobs, where it's melted unevenly. I think can be really interesting to get some of that impact at the back, maybe along that top edge. In fact, we probably should do that on layer 5. Go in with the eraser, set to the soft brush, 2% size, maybe 30% strength. And we could either have done this with the blur, or we could simply just go in with the eraser and just soften that back edge. And it essentially gives the idea of it kind of being more blurred along that top line. And it does that soft focus for us in essence as well, like that. Back to the brush, back to the layer 9. So look at our colours, maybe a more muted fourth colour. Again, just build in some of these extra textures. Let's have a look down in these areas with this colour. Add some more texture to pumpkin face. Bring out some of these highlights. This kind of fleshier look, almost like wrinkled skin. And then maybe with the second yellow on the bottom row, perhaps we just need to ramp up the luminosity of this central kind of melted waxy area. Build in a glow up there. I think that works better, especially in the kind of central area where the flame is. Let's turn it up a little bit more, higher on the 2%. This area generally just a bit more glow, because we've got a glow coming through on this bit as well, which perhaps we will ramp up a little bit more. Down here, like that. Perhaps we'll go for 8th colour. And I don't want to add too much of this, it's a bit strong that, so let's put it down to 20%. 2% size on the soft brush, and maybe just in some of the gaps in between the threads, you can just build in some glow that's just emerging through in one or two places. Perhaps that's even a bit orange, maybe 10th colour in the middle row. We can build in some of that glow, extend some of that a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to concentrate on the face just a little bit more. 3rd colour on the middle row, soft brush, 1% size, 40% strength. Let's just really ramp up some of this darkness to really create a contrast, and then we'll add some more highlights before we call this little character's face done. It really needs to pop a little bit more than it does. Let's ramp it up a bit more. Make it even more noticeable at a distance, perhaps. When you zoom out, you'll see the candle, but you definitely want the face to be really prominent. I don't necessarily want it to be like a black outline. There's going to be some areas where it catches the light a little bit more, or rather has a shadow bit and has a thickening up of the black lines, but let's keep it less consistent so it doesn't just look like eyeliner around the eyes and things. We'll go in perhaps to another layer. We'll go to layer 8 where it's got the candle flame on, it doesn't matter. Go in with the 10th colour on the middle row. And because we've got the blend mode on now, the add blend mode, this is going to really ramp up that glow in a really quite satisfying way. Do it for the eyes. Zoom out, check it. 2% size. Okay, and just build in that glow. That's really starting to bring it out in a really nice way. Back to maybe layer 7. Go in with a orange colour, 8th colour, soft brush, 1% size, 20% strength. And we'll just extend that glow a little bit in places, but not too much. Going with that 10th colour. I feel like the teeth at the bottom have got a little bit lost, so we'll put that up to 40% strength. We don't want to lose those bottom teeth, so to speak. We'll go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing. Back on layer 9 again. I want to really brighten it, so the 5th colour. I think this corner still needs a bit more, so soft brush, 2% size, 20% strength, and I just think this corner needs to be even brighter. Sometimes you just zoom out and you really look at it and you think, yeah, it just needs to be more, even brighter there. Maybe brighter on this edge too. Broken textures, that's fine. Build up the highlights in places. That's working better for it. Foreground areas, so we'll go to our top layer, create a new layer, layer 12. I'm not going to make it overly complicated. I'm going to go 3% size, 20% strength. We're going to use some of the other colours we've already used, more muted perhaps initially. We'll think about the colours we used at the top. So maybe the 2nd colour on the top row. And well, we've got to ground this with more texture. So maybe 4% size, a bit more actually, 30% strength. We want it emerging from the ground. So some of the ground detail needs to be there too. And again, I don't intend to get bogged down in detail. Just textures, give it a place to exist. I'm absolutely fine with it pretty much being out of focus, other than the candle. Let's change color. Let's go for maybe the second color on the middle row. Put it up even more, 5%. Size, touch of this color in the foreground, a bit of warmth maybe. But again, not too much. I don't want too much warmth in the foreground, so maybe that's even a bit much. Maybe this color, so the sixth color, middle row. Perhaps we could turn that down 2%, and maybe just on the edges of some of these blobs that we're put in there, we'll give the sense of a highlight. Maybe it's a leaf that's just has an edge catching the light a little bit more. And you don't really need to overly define what it is. I think there's enough chaos when there's leaves on the ground just to give hints of things, and I think that really we can kind of understand and use our imagination a little bit when we see it. Play around with colors, so we'll go for the fourth color on the middle row. 4% size, maybe we can just build in a few touches, stronger highlights, things in the foreground even. Don't want to distract us too much from the main focal area, but nothing wrong with adding a bit more. Just in and around. Again, we don't want it to be a distraction, but I think that it does benefit. Too much there. Maybe go in with the seventh color, and we want to extend some of this color that's in the thread. 40% or 30% is too strong even. Let's go down to 15% opacity, and we're just taking the color of the thread and extending it down into the ground area a little bit more. So it extends the impact that that thread has into other areas perhaps. Even though it's out of focus, I think it's doing a good job. I go back to maybe the fifth color on the top row, just in the upper areas, 5% size, 15% strength. I feel like I could just add a bit more of that mottled look. Let's go even bigger, 7%, bit more up in the upper area again. Once more, I feel like we could go back. Let's go to the seventh color on the bottom row again. Actually, we might just use more of that. Perhaps it's a little bit strong at 15. Let's put it down to 10. Again, 7% size or so. Doesn't really matter as long as it's a good chunky amount. Circle in a bit more of that near the top area. And I think that's almost enough to call it a day with this image. So I think I'm going to leave it at this point. I might extend this a little bit further over at my Patreon. Again, the link for my Patreon is down in the video description. But otherwise, I think we've come up with quite a cute little character for this time of year. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I shall see you back here again soon. Bye for now.